we get caught up in the minutia of, you know, length and technical details and outlines, but really just think about your business in the form of telling stories. And this is a little quote from Venture Hacks, which I think really sums it up. You know, to get good terms, you need multiple offers. To get multiple offers, you need to tell a good story. So that's what we're doing here. What form does this story take? In the form of our pitch. Next slide, please. If you have unlimited time, here's kind of the full list of pitch materials you could build in a theoretical parallel universe. Everything from your tagline or your email intro to your teaser to you know, business model canvas to brochures and video demos, explainer videos, angel list profiles, Kickstarter, everything else. But really what we're focusing on today, of course, is probably the most commonly used and most versatile pitch format, which is the pitch deck. Next up, so what is a pitch deck? Pitch deck means a couple things in some ways. In the olden days, you know, a few years ago when I was consulting with startups, we would write a big, long, 30-page business plan, spend 2 months doing it, and then we would condense it into a 15-slide deck. You know, the deck was really a condensation of the business plan. Nowadays, the pitch deck actually takes the place of the business plan in many startups. People are writing fewer and fewer business plans, even though there's still some value to it. But the deck is the new plan, and as such, a pitch deck really takes two forms now that it's both a business plan and a pitch deck. You know, we have our live pitch deck, which we use when we're actually sitting down in front of a group of investors or even a single investor. And of course, we have our leave behind pitch deck, which is different. It's usually more detailed. It's something that the VCs can circulate around the office. It's something the analysts at the VC firm can take and dig into. You know, so today we're mostly going to be talking about our live pitch deck, but think about your pitch deck as your business plan, and think of it in both your live format and your leave behind format. And just a few quick tips for the leave behind, because we're not going to talk about it too much today. The one you're going to leave behind or send ahead when you're meeting with an investor, you know, make it a small file size, have screenshots of your product instead of a demo. Avoid builds. Don't use any builds in the one you're going to be sending. Builds are pretty bad overall, but especially if you're sending the deck. Use a white background because it'll probably be printed, or it might be printed, especially with older partners at a VC firm. And use a PDF if desired. And of course, don't make it a, you know, I get decks from entrepreneurs that are 19 megabytes in size and take forever to download. You know, condense it. Make it easy for them to consume your deck that you're sending. Okay, next slide, please. So let's talk about how to build a pitch deck. You know, the first thing to figure out is what is your one thing? You know, investors, put yourself in the context of an investor. You're hearing 5 companies come in and pitch you a day times 5 days a week, plus all the pitches that are coming in over the transom or happening at your kid's baseball game. Investors are really looking for one thing to hang their hat on. You know, they're looking to filter it out and really think about one thing. And in addition to that, there's kind of a half-life of a pitch. You know, you go in and pitch on a Monday or Tuesday, they probably don't have their partners meeting for another week. And so what is the one thing that investors are going to remember a week later? You think of it like that, you know, when they meet. So in short, what makes you exceptional? It's a hard thing to identify, especially when you're in the weeds of your business and, you know, operating it and you're thinking about it from every angle. But if you can extract the one thing that makes you exceptional, you're halfway there. Don't just take my word for it. Next slide. You know, there's a great quote from Naval Ravikant, who runs AngelList, really emphasizing that investors are looking to find exceptional outcomes, and so you need to do something exceptional. If you can't identify your one thing, you might not be ready to go pitch. So let's talk about a couple ways, next slide please, in how to frame your one thing. I'm going to call this pitch archetypes. That's right. So here are a few ways to frame your one thing, to how to frame your story, and the reason this is important is because how you frame your business and how you guide the discussion has a big impact on how people will react to your story, what they retain from your story. Think of what will they retain a week later when they're meeting with their partners to discuss your business. And how you guide the discussion also impacts what they will share with other investors. If you can boil it down to something concrete, your one thing that can easily be shared, you're more likely to sort of stay top of mind, especially as people are talking internally at a VC firm. So let's cover a bunch of pitch archetypes. Next slide. First one, most people are going to be familiar with. It's the problem solution. This is the classic Sequoia Capital outline. And probably, from a very my own unscientific study accounts for 85 to 90% of the decks out there. You found a rich, valuable pain point, and you're solving it. It's the painkiller versus vitamin argument. It's classic. It's familiar. Everyone is familiar with it. Everyone knows it. It's not always as relevant, for Web 2.0 or social companies. I mean, is there really a pain point being solved by a check-in business? So it doesn't always fit for everyone, but it does fit for a lot of people, and it can be combined with other archetypes, which we'll look at in a minute. Next archetype, number 2, traction story. This is my favorite. It's pitching the numbers. I'm a numbers guy, so this really gets me excited. Here the story is really focused on your growth rate, your growth and the rate of your growth, and the slope of your line. And in many ways, what you're actually doing, what your business is, becomes less important, becomes secondary to the numbers that you're putting up. Think about like Fab.com. They've raised a succession of massive rounds, largely on the strength of their metrics. Bonus points, of course, if you can demonstrate that lifetime value of a customer is greater than your acquisition cost. VCs just are ready to open their wallet when you can demonstrate that. Point money becomes a no-brainer. And for any startup, I think there's a direct correlation between the strength of your traction story and the speed at which you raise funding. There's a lot of good content on the web. On Quora, there's some good threads on how to communicate traction to investors. And then if you look at, you might have to Google it because I have a long URL in front of me, but Fab's CEO told a story of raising, behind the scenes of how Fab raised $40 million. Basically, they made their investors log into their metrics account, see the numbers first, and then if they were still interested, given a certain set of conditions and terms, then they would meet the firm. So they actually led with their traction story. I can send out links afterwards if anyone wants to follow up. Next archetype, please. X for Y. This is a really popular one, very in vogue right now. It's essentially applying a proven model to a new market or application. And it can be combined with problem solution. A lot of startups combine the X for Y with a problem solution. So in this simple equation, we have X as the established model, like Airbnb, and Y is the new market that you are going to apply this model to. So the example I often use is dog vacay. Dog vacay is the Airbnb for dog boarding, right? Very simple to understand. You get it instantly. For this archetype to work, X needs to be a successful model. Clearly, Airbnb is successful, and Y must be a large market. Dog boarding is pretty large, so it fits. And ideally, the metaphors you use in place of X and Y should be well known. There's some risk of overuse. You see this X for Y a lot. Sometimes it doesn't really work because people use companies that no one's heard of, so it kind of doesn't make sense. And a variation on this is what I call the Hollywood pitch, which is kind of a mashup of two different scripts, which is very similar.
If it doesn't apply, should you just not use it?
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time with this. I've always had a hard time with this, and people keep trying to jam this thing down my throat that I need because I'm in a new market, kind of.
Yeah.
And I cannot come up with the X for XOY at all. So should I just avoid it, which I've been doing?
Yep, because it'll lead to more confusion.
Yes.
People are like, well, that doesn't. If your XOY leads to more confusion, then the point of XOY is that it should provide instant clarity on what you're doing. And if it's doing the opposite, then get rid of it. And I'm going to task you with something. After we've gone through these archetypes, I want you to tell me which one does seem to fit yours best.
Oh, that's easy. The problem solution.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's good. So you don't need it. Yeah.
No,
don't
but it's funny because people keep making me try to come up with this, and then they pitch me the XOY, and I'm like, no.
So you're kind of like, yeah.
Okay, good. So.
Cool.
These aren't mutually exclusive, then, right? You could use several of these archetypes.
Exactly. Yeah, and a lot of people, and especially the problem solution and XOY are combined frequently. That's probably the two most common combinations.
Yeah, and that's why, because I have one, I don't have the other, so sometimes it's good.
You don't have X, you don't have Y. You don't have the proven model, you don't have the new market.
I don't have either.
Okay.
Well, I have some sort of proven markets, but
let's come back to this.
Yeah, no,
okay.
let's go forward. Yeah.
But yeah, this would be good in Q&A. Yeah. I'd be interested to hear your problem solutions. Okay, archetype number 4, scratched your itch. This is, a great story to tell. Remember, we're telling stories. The story is your personal story that you had some problem that was driving you crazy, and that you solved it. A lot of technical companies get started this way and have used this in their pitches. Like I always use the example of Heroku, Dropbox, and GitHub. Dropbox is probably the most famous example that Drew Houston, got frustrated carrying around USB drive, so he started Dropbox, right? Easy story to understand. It's a good archetype to use if you really know your problem intimately, if you've come from a background in this market, and if the problem is universal, right? If your problem is so niche or esoteric that it's not going to really appeal, then this is a harder archetype to use. Okay, good. Next archetype is the crystal ball. This one's kind of fun. I like this one. There's some pitfalls to it, but crystal ball is what I also call evolution next, or skating to where the puck will be, or connecting the dots, converging trends. These all kind of mean the same thing. Essentially, what you're doing here is you're starting off by walking an investor through where a market has been historically and how it's evolved, and then connecting the dots to where it will go next. Seen this. I worked with a company called Radar Networks. It was semantic web. They did this very effectively in their pitch, raised a lot of money. The company didn't succeed, but they raised $40 million on this story. You've seen this in the cloud. Cloud businesses do this a lot. Mobile businesses do this a lot, kind of showing where the industry has been and is, and where it's going. It's a powerful archetype because you're showing investors a peek into the future, and they love that stuff, right? So it can be easier to get meetings using this archetype. The harder part, of course, is convincing them that you are the one with the solution, and that you can execute when a market doesn't exist yet, right? So those are the tricky parts of using this archetype. And that you're flexible enough to, execute around hidden minefields. So it gets meetings, but you still have to prove that you can execute in a murky future. Archetype number 6. Wouldn't it be cool if? This is also kind of a fun one. You are basically doing an imagination scenario with the investor, getting them to imagine something with you. Excuse me. And you're using interesting, fun, cool use cases or anecdotes to give your pitch. Example I like to use is TaskRabbit, right? Wouldn't it be cool if you could hire someone to wait in line at the Apple Store for you? Or Uber, of course. Wouldn't it be cool if you could just hail a taxi from your phone and watch it drive towards you? This is a good one if you have something that's kind of got gee whiz or novelty to it. Next slide. A few more archetypes we're going to go through a little faster because these are somewhat less frequently used. New business model, this is where you're taking existing technology and you're innovating on the business model side. Sunrun, which is a solar company, is an example of this, right? They're just taking regular solar panels, but they're kind of leasing it back to customer in a different way. Consumerification of enterprise. This is Yammer, Asana, some B2B kind of web, Twitter, B2B companies fit this pitch. And basically the pitch is you're winning by creating cheaper software that gets continually better and that often has a social or viral component to it, right? Dream team. Essentially, this is where you've assembled a team with some rare or unique set of talents, skills, or other assets. Some scientists that come from NASA that are doing something that would be hard to duplicate by a competitor, or your team is a all-star team. Everyone has startup home runs on their resume. Service at scale. This is some smaller service, like I use the example of 99 Designs, right? It's a $100 logo or $200 logo, but when you do it at scale, it becomes a pretty big business. Wave accounting is another example of that. Breakthrough technology, kind of just like what it sounds like. You've invented a new touchscreen interface or a solar film or something that's patentable. There's usually some IP you can put around this. And then finally, the pivot. The story here, or the archetype here, is that you've tried several things. You've learned from each failure. Tried several things that failed. You've learned from each failure, and from that insight, you're setting off in a new direction and a new vision that only you can see because of the failures you've had to date. It's a little bit of a tricky one to use because it can also just sound like you failed a lot and now you're trying something else. But the example I use is PayPal. Of course, they had 5 pivots on their way to kind of figuring it out and making a big home run. Okay, so those are our archetypes. Next, we're going to quickly cover minimal viable pitch. It took some time and kind of sat down to figure out what is literally the smallest amount of information you can convey to get a pitch across. And the point here is to keep your pitch so short, so simple that it becomes elegant. And I think there's elegance in having a very short, minimalist pitch, because really, when you think about it, the first pitch meeting is the first date where you're mutually screening each other. You don't need to convey everything that's going on and has gone on and will go on with your business. You're really just mutually screening each other to see if you want to have a second date. And a common mistake I see over and over again, I've worked with lots and lots of entrepreneurs who pack so much detail into their first pitch that it becomes undigestible. You can't get through it, and that's an immediate fail. So, big emphasis on keeping things uber minimal, simple, painfully simple. When I work with startup clients, I always tell them, we're going to go through this process, and it's going to be painful because we're going to cut out everything but bone and muscle. Let's see, but again, reasons for doing it so minimalist is it helps you avoid rat holes, which are very easy to fall into when you're actually pitching investors, like going too deep into tech or product or into the competitive landscape. And then finally, it helps with engagement and retention when you're actually meeting with investors. If you go in, this is a little tip or hack I like to give. If you go in for an hour-long meeting with an investor, you tell them you've only got 5 slides you want to cover with them. And they're used to seeing 30 slides, right? They're used to some guy coming in, setting up a demo, setting up a 30-slide deck, and knowing they're going to have to suffer through it. When you come in and tell me you have 5 slides, you're going to see increased engagement and alertness on their part, which is a good thing for you. So next slide. We're going to go pretty quickly because I want to cover this whole talk. But here's a very simple format for minimal viable pitch. This is a little bit of, first start off, what you're doing and why. Pretty simple. In this scenario, we're talking about dog vacay, again, using the example of the Airbnb for dog boarding. In this very simple example, I can send you these slides later, so I'm not going to read it all off, but in this first section here, what you're doing and why. We cover the target customer, we cover the market size, we cover problem and solution in 3 short sentences. Next build, please. Yeah. Okay. And then what you're doing and why. Next, we go into who are you. You know, we have the team here. We also have some advisors, and in a pretty short format, we've covered the fact that this team has, you know, a hacker, hustler, designer. They've got pedigree, they've got experience, they've got social proof, and they've got peer reference, right? So we've conveyed a lot of information in very little amount of space. Next build, what's going on? I'll read this because I use acronyms here. Proof of concept in San Francisco, New York, Atlanta now, adding 3,000 members and 120 boarders a week. Partnership with American Kennel Club. We're running select Google ads, and we're booking $55 a night, taking a 7% cut. So our revenue is $385 per booking. So again, in a very short amount of space and time, we've covered that we have traction, we have a marketing plan, we have partnerships or biz dev deal in place, and we have a business model. This is a nice minimal way to express the traction story, what's going on. Next build. What we want, we're looking for a $4 million Series A to hit 6 more geographic markets. Our burn rate is $75,000 a month. We think we can break even at 2,000 bookings a week. And we're spending, our revenue per customer, our lifetime value of a customer is $145. We're spending $33 to get them. So what we're showing here is we know where we're going. We have a sensible use of our funds. We have a vision. We have economics that scale, and we have a path to profitability. So, you know, this takes 15 minutes to put all this stuff together if you don't get caught up in all the clutter of all the other stuff, and we cover a lot of really key critical information, hence why I call it the minimal viable pitch. And you can take each of these and build them out into their own slide, add a little image or supporting diagram, and you've got your deck done. You've got a killer MVP. I did not include a competition slide because that can be a rat hole. That's something you might have in your appendix. But, you know, let's match up the MVP that we just did with Sequoia's classic outline. This is from their website. They've had this up there for a decade. Our MVP nails pretty much everything on Sequoia's 10-slide deck. And then next slide. Not only does it hit, you know, old guard like Sequoia, but it hits the 500 startups criteria too. Product solution, business model, distribution, traction, and team. And then finally, next slide, you know, this was a TechCrunch article from a way back where he raised 5 slides, $10 million. You know, it can be done. Minimalist works. Next slide. It's weird. Okay. We're not going to look at some decks, but I can send out a list of links to some decks that are online. There's some pretty interesting decks people have put up. Like, there's a lot of startups that put their decks online for anyone to view on share posts, SlideShare, stuff like that. And some have really good design. Others have some good, you know, ways they've done, like the traction story, a crystal ball.
Everest that you have listed there, Francis just joined the group.
Oh, really? Cool. So, okay, go back a second, Everett. Yeah. Well, he probably isn't listening because he's probably busy, but yeah, Everest has a pretty. When I first saw Everest's deck online, like, wow, they are putting it all out there. Like,
they were the first deck to do that, right? The online pitch deck, which is the unique factor.
Definitely among the first, yeah. Dress Rush was an early one that put out there, and they got a ton of viral buzz around it because they put their whole deck online. But yeah, Everest, I'd be curious to hear him. It might be interesting to have him talk to what he's here, how it's gone. Okay, cool. Next slide. So they're building this, so you're going to have to keep going. But we go this pretty quick. These are kind of just nuts and bolts of building your deck. File type, you know, typically just PowerPoint, Keynote, or in some cases Prezi. Prezi, people like that. Some people don't. I get a little motion sickness with Prezi. Formatting, next. You know, white background, if it will be printed, or the business plan version like I mentioned before. Even though I'm using a build here, you know, I really don't suggest you use builds for this very reason. It's kind of a pain in the ass for having technical difficulties with builds. Let's see, length, 5 slides, you know, for the minimalist pitch, 10 to 12 slides for the Guide Kawasaki Sequoia outline, and then maybe, you know, a deck that gets to 25 slides if you have a lot of stuff in the appendix. I always tell startups, you know, startup founders who want to put a lot of detail and clutter into their slides, I tell them to go crazy in the appendix. Just pack it all in there, but keep the body of the deck super clean. Tone, you know, it depends. I like confident slides. I like kind of bordering on cocky slides where you're very confident. You see that with some consumer internet companies work to their credit. Or if you've pivoted a few times, you know, your deck might be a little more thoughtful, reflective in its tone. Of course, if you're selling to the enterprise or B2B, you probably have a fairly serious tone in your deck. Online is next. You know, we just talked about this a little bit. A lot of startups now are putting their decks online, either behind a wall, like on AngelList, you can have your deck kind of visible only to investors. But a lot of startups are putting their decks out there and seeing some viral activity from it. You know, I don't know if it leads to investment or not, but certainly gets attention when you put your deck, a good deck out there for anyone to see. Let's see, AngelList, you know, this is pretty much, everyone's on AngelList these days, so I don't think this even has to be stated. But a lot of decks nowadays will have a link through to an AngelList profile. It's kind of a call to action to go to AngelList. Let's see, next, confidentiality. You know, whether or not you put your deck online, even if you're sending it to an investor, just assume it will be shared, and it may or probably will be leaked out. I've seen it happen firsthand. Sanitize it if you need to without going crazy. Or next one, you know, if you're really paranoid, if you've got IP that you're really worried about getting out, you could set everything up in a data room. A data room is a password-protected storage vault that you can track who goes in and who accesses what. CapLinks is one of those, and there's a lot of data rooms out there. Some quick talks on presentation hacks when you're actually pitching. Let's see, first one is just arrive early and assume the investor's going to be late, but don't let that rattle you. Next up, a live demo. You know, I usually say keep your live demo to 3 minutes and don't get lost in the product, which is easy to do. Startup founders should go off on a 10-minute demo. You'll lose, unless your demo is just incredible, you're going to lose people. And usually we put the demo, you know, pretty quickly into the pitch. After the what, why, and who, we get into the demo. Laptop demo is simply assume that, you know, Wi-Fi will be down that day, or you forgot your power cord and your battery's gone. Actually, that doesn't make sense. Assume, you know, something doesn't work and you need to run a demo off your laptop. But speaking of, if your battery does die, you know, be able to run through it in a conversational tone and just tell a story. You know, go and be able to tell your pitch without relying on tools and technology. I've seen it happen a couple times in pitches where all the technology doesn't work. The founder did actually forget his laptop cord and his battery was dead, so we just sat there and told a story about what they're doing. It's a very powerful conversation, more connection, more intimate, and it worked. It was a good thing. Tuning is the next one, which is basically just knowing your VC, do some research on this. Kind of states the obvious, but not everyone does it. Who have they invested in before? what were their backgrounds before becoming VCs? Were they finance people or marketing people or product guys? You can tune your story a little bit if you know what the audience is. Next is just memorize it. You know, if you memorize it enough, it actually starts to get really fluid and doesn't sound like you've memorized it. It becomes conversational, and you don't have to rely on your, you know, your deck or your computer. Next up, performance. You know, when you're pitching it, you are being judged on whether you have what it takes to build a company, to build a big home run company, to attract the team and future investors to your company. So don't hesitate if you feel comfortable with it to walk around. I've seen some startup founders who can't sit and give a pitch. They have to walk around and whiteboard and use you know, elongated pauses to make their points. I mean, it's okay to have a little performance element in your pitch. Next up, friendly fire. You know, obvious thing, but not everyone does it. Basically, practice your pitch several times, numerous times, with friends, advisors, attorneys, other people in Founders Network, even occasionally with VCs or investors maybe you don't want to raise money from. Just getting familiar, being on the firing line of your pitch and in front of investors and people who will throw curveball questions at you really helps. And then, of course, finally, don't forget to ask for the close. You're there asking for money. You're not just talking for no reason. So ask what next steps are and how you can move things forward, and if they're interested in investing and what level of interest they have. Finally, I won't cover this too much, but just how to get started. You know, I'll give 3 tips here. One thing I do a lot is literally sit down with 10 pieces of blank white paper and a pen and just sketch out slides and then reorder them, shuffle them around into a story that makes sense. I actually like sketching on paper first before doing a PowerPoint or Keynote. It helps, I don't know, tap some creative juices that I don't get when I'm starting with a Keynote slide or PowerPoint slide. Or, you know, the other way I do this is I do start with Keynote or PowerPoint, but I just have a blank Keynote and I'll do a headline, title of each slide, and like a subtitle, and then kind of finish the rest later. And that's a way to kind of get that story arc going. I think that's enough we need to cover there. So that's pretty much it. I'll close with this one, emphasizing simplicity and minimalist pitch, which will make so much of the rest of this business easier. If you think of your pitch in terms of telling a story and in terms of telling it a minimalist, simple story, you'll go along.